Welcome, Dungeon Plunger Union members. I have my +1 plunger, a steaming hot cup of holy water blessed by St. Keurig, and I have a very special Union member with me today to help plunge the dungeon and flush evil down the drain. Our guest today is the founder of Frog God Games, or one of the founders, I should say, a prolific dungeon magazine adventure writer from back in the day. Welcome to the show, Greg Vaughan.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I'm Greg. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the show, Greg. It's a pleasure. I've always been a humongous fan of your work, and so to have you on the show is a dream come true. Um, how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of like what you're doing now, because you're not, I don't think you're really in the industry anymore, are you now?
Very peripherally. And I apologize. I always wanted to do a cold open, so I
That's cool,
tried
man.
to drop that on you. So I'm kind of peripherally in the industry. I do little dribs and drabs here and there. I recently did a bit for Paizo, just like a little article for their I don't think it's out yet, but they're going to back to the Rune Lords again, and they wanted me to do a little bit on that. I'm working with Michael Sayre, who's got a new game he's developing and is, I think, about to drop called Infinite Reimagine. Um, but I think that's the only formal things. I actually, ironically, now that I'm not writing regularly and not in the industry, I actually get to game. And so I'm running several games and I do a ton of writing just for those games, stuff that'll never be published. Um, so yeah, I mean, my involvement is peripheral. I'll be at Gen Con for the first time since 2018 here in a few weeks, and I'll actually do some work at Paizo's booth, just probably mainly just hanging out with old friends and stuff, but handing out buttons, Gen Con stuff. But that's about it. Yeah, mostly I'm not involved in the industry.
That's sweet. What kind of stuff are you running right now? Is it Pathfinder, Pathfinder 2?
It's all Pathfinder, Pathfinder 1, I should say. Pathfinder, so for starters, I'm old. I'm an old man. I don't like change. Um, I'm always been a slow adopter on new games. Other than 1E to 2E, I adopted that pretty quickly just because 1E was always so clunky. Loved it, but 2E just smoothed so many things out, even though I didn't love everything about it. 2E to 3E took me several years. I did go pretty quick from 3E to 3.5 because again, it smoothed so many things out. And Pathfinder 1 just hit the sweet spot for me. I was like, this is my game. I never I never really did anything with 4E. I wrote a little bit for 4E. And I've tried 5E. 5E feels like better 2E to me, but it doesn't have as many fiddly bits as I would like. It doesn't have as many options, or it doesn't have them as crunchy as I want them. And Pathfinder 2, I just can't embrace it. It's a great game. I just can't wrap my head around it to where I really like playing it. I've played it. I've written for it. It just doesn't scratch the itch for me. It doesn't hit that old school feel that I think Pathfinder 1. Pathfinder 1 I can play as if I'm playing a 1E game and have that kind of feel. And I don't think anything after Pathfinder 1, whether it be 4E, 5E, or Pathfinder 2, really does that. It doesn't have the same stakes. It doesn't have the same flow of the game, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's all Pathfinder 1.
That's very interesting that you say that Pathfinder gives you the feel of 1E. I think there would be a lot of people who would argue that the two are like so opposed to one another. How does that feel to you? Like what is exactly about Pathfinder that feels like the 1E?
It's not the mechanics, because that's what you're talking about are so opposed.
Right.
The 1E mechanics were a mess. Like the DM guide is more like a collection of essays than
Hmm.
really a rule book. Um, so it's not the mechanics. I think it's much improved in mechanics. The whole third edition bringing in the battle mat concept and introducing a tactical element to the game is, I think, what was always missing.
Mm.
And, and I love that. But what I mean by it gives the same feel is I can take any 1E or even basic or expert adventure and run it in Pathfinder rules and I'm running the same adventure. It's more involved in the tactical side, it's more involved in the rule side, but everything that you can do in 1E, you can do in Pathfinder 1. Like it will, game style, it will port directly over. You can't do that with Pathfinder 2, in my experience. You can't with 4E. 5E, you kind of can, but 5E is just like the light beer of all games
Mm.
in my mind. And I don't mean to disparage it. It's
Hmm.
sort of an everyman game. Everybody can get involved. It's got a low bar for entry, which is great. I mean, that's what the industry needs, but it doesn't do that for me. So with Pathfinder 1, I can run the Tomb of Horrors and I can kill everybody in the party, just like I could in 1E. But I can do it in a way that it's not so arbitrary. Like I can do it through actual rules that make sense.
Right.
It'll be harder because they'll have more options and more ability because it's not so arbitrary. But I can do it. And so I run my games, and the feel of my games that I run feel the same to me as they did when I was running 1E, 30 years ago. Gosh, 40 years ago,
That's
45 years ago,
that's really interesting. I hadn't considered that.
35 years ago. I can't do the math.
That's all right. Um, so I discovered you in the Dungeon Magazine days, during Paizo's heyday of running with the magazines. I believe your first published adventure was Tamarat's Fate, which came out
Yes,
Dungeon 106 in 2004.
correct. Very
Um,
good.
you quickly became a fan favorite. Can you tell us about what led up to you being published at the time, and sort of how you got your start with the
Yeah,
magazines?
sure. Uh, it goes back before that to about 89. So that was 2004. Yeah, and 89 is when I first saw Dungeon Magazine. My older brother bought issue number 11, which is still one of my favorite issues of Dungeon Magazine. And that sort of opened my eyes. And 15-year-old Greg was like, this is amazing. I don't have to wait months between a release and then I got to go spend $5 or $6 to get an adventure. And then, some adventures are Pharaoh and some adventures are the Forest Oracle. And you just really don't know till you buy it and break open the plastic wrap and realize if it sucks or not. And so here for, 350, I can get 5 or 6 adventures, and some of them aren't going to be great, but some of them are going to be awesome. And they're almost always at least good. And they had this thing in the back where like, hey, you can submit to it. I never subscribed to Dragon, and I've never been a huge rules crunch guy, which might sound inconsistent with what I was saying earlier. I like to use rules. I don't like to write rules, I guess.
Mm.
So I knew people submitted to Dragon, but I had never had a temptation to do that. And I realized you can submit to Dungeon. So 15-year-old Greg submitted his first adventure to Dungeon. It was called the Mines of Keldic. And it was a dwarven mine that was being occupied, very original, right? An overrun dwarven mine. And it was immediately rejected. And they said all the plot happens before the adventure because I'm also a Tolkien fan. So I've got this massive background for what's essentially a dungeon crawl. And so I tried again. And so I would send in a submission or two every year for about 15 years.
Holy
I'd have an
cow.
idea and I'd write up a submission, I'd send it in and I'd get my rejection letter and then I would move on. And then I submitted what became the Istavan trilogy.
Yes.
Shadows of the Abyss
Hmm.
was what I submitted it under, and it got rejected. And then I submitted Tamarat's Fate shortly thereafter, and it got rejected. But they rejected it for very specific reasons. They were like, it was Eric who did it. He's like, well, this doesn't make sense and that doesn't make sense. And so I responded. I was like, look, you give me like 2 pages to do everything in. This all makes sense. And so I sent him a longer submission, basically explaining it all. And he came back. He's like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, we want that adventure.
Mm.
And so I was like, ooh, my first adventure. I'm gonna write an adventure, which is not the first one I wrote because when I submitted the Mines of Celtic, I wrote the adventure first, longhand in pencil, and before it got rejected. But anyway, so I'm like excited. I'm writing that adventure, and then he says, "And by the way, we want the Shadows of the Abyss also."
Really?
And then he says, but I think you need to break it up into three adventures and a background article on the city of Istavan. So I went from having no adventures to write to four and a background article to write. And that was kind of a clincher type of moment where I was like, um, and so yeah, so then all of a sudden I was doing a flurry of writing, and it was Greyhawk stuff, and Eric Moan is a big Greyhawk guy, and I it just appealed to him. So everything I think that I ever wrote for Dungeon Magazine is a Greyhawk adventure, which was fine because Greyhawk was always my world of choice for sure. That 1E feel again, right?
Right. That was definitely something I wanted to ask you about was like what was your connection with Greyhawk? And when you were sending in these things, were you aware that Eric Mona was a huge Greyhawk fan and that this was your attempt to try to like hook them with something you thought they might want to buy more than let's say something else?
No, that I wasn't clever enough for that. It was just a happy coincidence. After 15 years, I sent something in that resonated with the editor, I guess is what it amounted to. And then basically every year I was writing an adventure or two for them all the way up until the end of their magazine run.
Yeah, it's incredible the amount of stuff that you put out. Um like I have that you have the distinction of having written for at least one adventure for every Paizo adventure path, including when they were had the magazines. So from like Age of Worms all the way up to Wrath of the Righteous. Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Wrath of the Righteous was the last one I wrote in the string. I wrote at least one after that. But I was deep into medical school by that time. And in the Wrath of the Righteous, it was called The Midnight Isles, and I co-wrote that one with James Jacobs because I couldn't handle that work burden. And after that, I was like, I can't maintain this. It's too much.
So what was that experience like of being tapped to write these? Because I almost got the feeling that Paizo really like leaned on you as somebody who they knew could like put out the goods and that it was going to be like a solid adventure.
I mean, I think that's true. Well, I'm pretty meticulous, and I'm not saying I'm the best adventure writer or anything because there are many that are much better. But I give a really clean turnover, and I do really clean maps. Um, they would always have Rob Lazzaretti redraw 'em, but I think they were pretty easy for him to redraw. And I don't know, they just always told me they people would plan their vacations around when I was going to be doing a submission because they knew it wasn't going to take a bunch of work. That's what they told me. That's very flattering. I hope that's true. Um, so I'm not a fast writer. I was often late, and usually not too late, sometimes very late. But when they get it, they just didn't have to do much with it unless they wanted to. James Jacobs is a massive rewriter, and I mean that in a good way because he always makes it better. And so he would rewrite my stuff, but sometimes I would send in stuff and there would just be no changes, which was also kind of cool uh, in my mind. So it would, yeah, I think I was somebody that they leaned on because I was reliable. I was a proven commodity to them. And at that time, Paizo's like, 12 or 15 people. And I was friends with all of them by this time because I went to Origins in 2007 and I met them all there and, just struck up friendships with them. So it was really easy after that. We were very conversational with each other. We had each other's emails and stuff like that. So it was I don't know, it was a very special time if I hope that doesn't sound too corny, but it was really neat. Like there's just this little core of writers that they had and we're all friends and it was neat.
No, I think that makes sense. I got a definite sense of um that Paizo had kind of bottled magic at that point. Like there
Yes.
was something about how Eric, I'm not sure who else was like obviously it was probably a team effort, but how they had sort of reorganized the magazines. They had come out with this plan about how to get new subscribers. That was one of the big things,
Yeah.
exactly like what you were saying about having all these adventures in like one magazine. We're getting like three or four adventures in one magazine for the price of like a third of what it would cost to get an adventure from like Wizards or something like that.
Right.
And like you said, you never knew, like, is this Wizards thing going to be something good that I'm going to be able to use? And like, chances are, I mean, I've used tons of Dragon magazine. I always have something nice to say about them because I think they're so great. Um, but it just seemed like they were a very like community focused
Yeah.
company, and they worked so hard to put out solid product. And I always knew that like, okay, I'm gonna get a Greg Vaughan adventure. It's gonna be awesome. There's gonna be something I can use from it. And just your maps. Like that's something that I found interesting. Like, so you guys draw these maps, and I almost got a sense from looking at some of the pencil like drawings, like the roughs, that it was almost as if Rob had like put something like a computer thing over top of your actual map.
Photoshop. He did that at least some of the time. And I know this because on some of the maps, I can't remember which ones, but like if you look really close, you can see the very faint pencil lines
Hmm.
through the layers. I'm like, that's my he just did an overlay and filled in colors and cleaned it up a little bit. Very talented guy. But yeah, I think that's what he did. I don't know if he did it on all of them, but he definitely did it on some of them. And again, that's very flattering to me. I was like, oh, thank you.
I mean,
Maps is why I did the game as a kid because I loved drawing them,
really
you know.
interesting. So talking about the connection, like the closeness that there seemed to be like a rivalry, a friendly rivalry between Nick Logue and Richard Pett and yourself.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and that experience, and are you still in contact with either of them?
I am infrequent. We've drifted apart over the years, but we're all Facebook friends and have each other's email addresses, and we do communicate sometimes. We've talked about writing together
Oh
again
wow.
from time to time, but nothing's ever really come of it. Life gets in the way. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was after I think it was the Istvan trilogy because they had the Paizo had the message boards, the Paizo message boards,
Hmm.
which was one of the first message boards I was ever involved with. Again, I'm a late adopter, so I'm sure message boards have been around for a while. But their message boards was so wholesome.
Hmm.
And it was so collegial, so much camaraderie. I mean, it's like I would go there and there weren't people arguing and trolling each other. It was like a group of friends. Like there are people on the message boards that I would probably recognize them by their handle today. If they said, I'm so and so, I'd be like,
Mm.
I know who they are. And so I think it was after the Istvan trilogy came out and Richard commented on the message board something about it was the adventures he wished he wrote. And he
Mm.
decided I was his arch nemesis from then. And so we just started playing that up, and Nick Logue very quickly got involved. And so there would be, and they finally told us to stop, but we would put digs in our adventures about the other guys.
That's hilarious.
Like there's in Hook Mountain Massacre, Nick Logue very clearly wrote an NPC in who was me, who I think Hook Mountain Massacre was pretty
That was a
gruesome.
brutal, yeah.
Yeah, I was a wannabe writer or something or artist, and one of the ogres had torn me in half and was using my torso as a paintbrush on the wall. And like it was basically my name. I'm not he, like dropped a few letters out of my name, and at that point, Paizo's like, we probably need to stop making self-referential things in there." And
That's
I think I
hilarious.
got the last one in. I got a really subtle one in on Skeletons of Scarwall, where I name both Nick and Rich and
Nice.
just burn them hard. And it's subtle enough that I had to point it out to James,
Mm.
and he's like, "Okay, we'll keep it, but no more." So there are a pair of ghosts called Peg and Lout or
Oh,
Logue and Pet. And
nice.
they, for some reason, these wandering monster pair of ghosts that don't mean anything to the adventure have these very extensive background write-ups for them. And yeah, that was. I don't know if there were any ever done after that, but I really liked Peg and Lout.
That's fantastic. I'm gonna have to take a look at those adventures now to see that because I never noticed that. I noticed that I think it was in Savage Tides, the very last, was it the very last one that you did for
Yeah, I did
Savage?
that. Yeah, I did Prince of Demons. That was
Yeah.
the last AP in print dungeon, and I got to finish it off.
Yeah, so I think there was like a political reference in there of one of the characters. I want to say it was like
Maybe I don't
General
remember.
so and so, or I don't remember
I'd have to
now.
look. I don't
But
remember. It's been so long.
uh so Out of those adventures that you wrote, do you have a favorite one that like sticks out to you, or is it like trying to choose one of your babies kind of
It, do you mean in Dungeon or in
just
Pathfinder Adventure
in
Path or
I,
just overall
I would say in general, if there was
in
something where
general?
you were like, this was one that I just loved the most.
So the Aegis of Empires Adventure Path, which I mentioned before we started recording, um, it was very much my baby and had a long, long uh, path to publication, and it came out with Legendary Games. Here it is, Aegis of Empires by Legendary Games. Um, and so it's probably my favorite product. But ironically, I didn't write any of the adventures. I commissioned writers to write the adventures, and I had a 40-page outline for the adventures, and the writers did a great job of sticking to the outline and fleshing it out. And I gave them 30,000 words, and they sent me in 30,000 words, and then I added roughly 30,000 words to each adventure to further flesh it out. So I'm not the primary author. I'm the idea guy behind it, and then I'm the flesher outer. But those guys, one of them, let me just tell you who they are. Let me give credit where credit is due. Matt Goodall, Stephen Helt, Tom Knaus, Anthony Pryor, Alistair Rigg, and Jeffrey Swank all did phenomenal job on that. So that's probably my favorite overall for one that I didn't actually really write. I didn't write all of it. I wrote a lot of it, but these authors I got to give credit to. The probably my favorite adventure that I ever wrote was a Frog God Games adventure for the Blight setting.
Hmm.
It was called Bloody Jack, and it's this murder mystery involving a serial killer who's been dead for 30 years and suddenly he's started up again. And I ran that at several cons, and it's fairly involved. So like I would run it for 3 days at a con. I'd have 3 8-hour slots and
Holy
would run
cow.
it like Friday or maybe no, it was like 3 4-hour slots or 6 hour. Anyway, I like run it Saturday morning, Saturday evening, and then Sunday morning. And it would have to be the same group. I'm like, if you sign up for this, you have to sign up for all of them. And I would get so many compliments, and like people are showing up early. They're like, I gotta. There's a guy at North Texas RPG Con that named Marshall Matherin, and he not Marshall Math, yeah, Marshall Matherin. I'm trying to not say Eminem's name. That's Marshall Mathers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Marshall Matherin. Um, he came Sunday morning before the game. He's like, man, I was thinking about that adventure all night long, just trying to figure out what is happening because it's a mystery.
Hmm.
And it's got a really cool climax. There's a big fight on top of a Ferris wheel of all things
Oh,
because
that's
it's the
cool.
Blight, so you can
Yeah.
do stuff like that. So there's this vertical three-dimensional battlefield that happens at the end at the big climax, which has the big reveal. And I just between writing it, I enjoyed it so much, and I enjoyed how it turned out so much. And then the play experience with it, because I've run it, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, probably 3 times at cons, and then at least a couple times in my home campaigns. And it's just always gotten such a good response and has always been so much fun. So I would say that's probably my favorite one that I've written.
One of the things that I wanted to know was, so I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but how do you come up with the ideas for your adventures? And more to the point would be like, what is your process for writing an adventure?
Sure. So it depends. So like for Paizo, they would tell me the idea for my adventure. They would say what they want. And that's actually more difficult for me because I'm taking what they want and then trying to find a way to make it my own so that it appeals to me. Because I've got to have some kind of creativity welling up about it to get me engaged. I can't write to spec. I would be terrible at that. Um, and so trying to put my spin on it and yet stay true to what they're wanting and not interfere with that, which is a big challenge because it's easy to go too far astray and mess up the original idea. Which is why I give great kudos to these authors in Aegis of Empires because they could have done that and didn't do that, which I'm very grateful for. Um, and so part of like when Paizo would send me an assignment for probably like a month, I would just sit on it and ponder it and how what do I want to write within these parameters to make it a Greg Vaughan adventure. And not that there's some kind of specialness to Greg Vaughan adventures other than it's adventures that I feel, adventures that I want to play And if I was, I'm picturing 12, 15-year-old Greg, somebody running this adventure and me going, this is awesome. So that was the hardest part for writing to commission like that. And then if after I've literally thought about it for a month or two, then I just start outlining it, and the outline gets more and more detailed, and I start drawing maps. As I mentioned, maps is what got me into the game. Getting the basic box set that had the Caves of Chaos in it, and seeing those maps, the Keep map, for instance, for some reason, it's just like that's so cool. And I started drawing maps a long time before I started writing adventures. But once I've got the maps, it sort of starts writing itself in many ways. And so that's the process for commissioned. For ones that I'm just writing, whether it's Aegis of Empires or something for Frog God, it's just something that bubbled out. Like I just have an idea. It's your muse or whatever. Inspiration strikes. Bloody Jack. I just knew I wanted to write this adventure about a serial killer that's somehow come back from the dead in the Blight setting. And man, gosh, I don't know, it's probably 60,000 words, maybe more, 70,000. And it practically wrote itself, just going through, it's the next thing led to the next thing led to the next thing. And it's fairly complex plot because you're solving a mystery. And so you don't have to do the chapters in any particular order. There's a few chapters that one has to take place after the other, but everything else in the middle is just like, what clues do you follow? Where are you going to go? And it just kind of wrote itself. And so those are probably the most enjoyable. Those were less frequent. One, because I was doing the commission work mostly, and two, because I had to wait for something to strike, for inspiration to hit me.
How does that differ from like the stuff that you would write for your home campaign? Because I think a lot of people look at adventures, published adventures. I think like you mentioned, like Keep on the Borderlands, Caves of Chaos, and all that kind of stuff, and people go, "Oh, this is how it's supposed to be because this is how it's been published." Do you? I imagine that you're when you're running a game at home, it's completely different for preparing.
It's actually not because of my my personality. I want to write the adventure just like I was writing it for publication before I run it. I am not good off the cuff, which I think I've been invited to so many things, to games, whether it's Iron GM or whatever, where they want you, yeah, just go in and you just make it up as you go, and spontaneous, all this. And I'm like, that's not me. I'll just freeze. I don't know what to do. I have to have a good idea of how I want it to go. And it's not like I'm going to lock the players into a thing, but if I know how it's going to go, then whatever they choose, I know how to make it work with what they're choosing. And yeah, I am not an off the cuff, wing it, spontaneous ad lib, not yeah, ad lib kind of guy. It's so like in the early days of Paizo, we had this little internal message board for the writers, and it's spitball adventure ideas. It was for what was that series called that they had the first standalone adventures with Paizo. It was like Nick Logue kicked it off with Crown of the Kobold King and Game Mastery, the Game Mastery line. So we had a message board with, I don't know, a dozen writers of just throwing ideas out. And then Pies would be like, okay, do that one. And there was so much overwhelming creativity happening in those discussions. I couldn't hang. Somebody would throw out an idea and I'd be like, huh, that's a good idea. And then I would think about it and I'd be like, and what about this? Oh, and then we could do this. And then I'm like, okay, so how about this? And there are 9 ideas gone already. And I'm still on the first one. And I was like, yeah, I am not wildly creative. I'm strategically creative, maybe. I don't know. It takes me a lot of time to cogitate things to really get it percolating.
That's fair. How would you respond, and this isn't to put you on the spot or anything, but how would you respond to criticisms that, especially from like the old school kind of players, where they say like adventure paths and pre-written stuff is like the bane to role playing, and it's all about emergent storytelling, and you shouldn't have to like, have everything planned out. Like, how do you, I mean, what would be your response to that kind of play style?
I guess so. Here's what I tell people. People that just to go along with that, people talk about they don't like adventures that railroad the party. Well, unless you've got the entire world statted out and mapped out and planned out, or unless you're just super good at ad lib, which I'm not, then you're already railroading something. You've got a plan. I want them to go to the caves of chaos. Well, what if they don't go? Well, there's other areas around the caves, but that map is still just like a 10 square mile area. If they decide they want to find a rocket and go to the moon, I don't have that ready for them, right? So, in my opinion, unless you're just a natural talent at that, which I know a lot of people are, and I'm not one of them, unless you're a natural talent at that, every adventure is a railroad to some extent. The key is how well do you hide the tracks? I'm running 4 campaigns right now. I've run 8 campaigns since I was, 9, 10 years old. And I have never had a complaint through hundreds and hundreds of players, including at cons and stuff. So people that weren't my friends, people I didn't know. I've never had a complaint sorry, I've had one complaint. I've never had a complaint about being constrained on their play or their role playing ability. And it's because I try to let them do what they want, but it's all about gently steering them into the story that you're trying to tell. My adventures, if you look at my adventures, every one of my adventures, whether it's, in Slumbering Tsar, there's a whole bunch of sandbox stuff, but there's story in there. There's a story I'm telling. And in Slumbering Tsar, there's a big story, and then there's 1,000 little stories. But it's also a giant sandbox. It's a huge the desolation and then the ruined city and then a giant dungeon crawl. But when you read it, you realize this is all stories happening. And so I haven't gotten complaint, except for one guy who was in one of my home campaigns. And I honestly think he was about to move, which we didn't know that. And I think he was looking for an out. And I was in Bloody Jack. And one of the set pieces in Bloody Jack is you're trying to get information at this tavern, and it's basically a cop bar. Like it's where the city watch goes. So you're trying to suss out sort of these crooked cops and get information and be all subtle. Well, he's trying to pick fight in the cop bar. And I'm like, if you do this, you're out of the adventure. You're going to go to jail or they're going to kill you. And the adventure doesn't really accommodate prison break, right? That's way outside the scope. And he got so mad at me and was like, "You're not letting me have my kind of fun." I'm like, "This isn't that adventure." And there was no reason to pick a fight in the cop bar. It was all about role playing and interaction. And he's like, "I want to stab this guy." I'm like, "He's a cop. There's 1,000 cops in here. You're off the street. You're toast if you do that." And so that was the one. And then, like I said, a month later, he moved to Colorado and I never saw him again. He was actually in on the Slumbering Czar playtest, and that Slumbering Czar playtest took 7.5 years. So he had played that long. This was the next campaign after that. He had played that long, and it had been fine until that moment. So I don't think that was so much about the railroading and the constraint as maybe he was breaking up with us. It was just trying to ease the transition. That's a guess. I don't know. Uh, but that struck me as odd because I'm like, I mean, like I want you guys to be able to do what you want, but you see these YouTube videos and stuff about, well, let's go assassinate the king. I'm like, what? That's a whole different campaign than this campaign. We're doing Age of Worms. Assassinate the king doesn't really fit this. So to people who criticize that, they must have a very spontaneous, wild way of playing. I think they think that that's how Gary and Dave and those guys were doing it. But Gary and Dave had a map. They had a map and they had keyed encounter areas. So even they weren't do whatever you want. They're like, do whatever you want. Here's the dungeon you can do it in.
My feelings towards adventure paths has always been that like there's a social contract that happens within the group where you say, okay, for example, we're going to play Age of Worms, and everybody's like, cool, we're playing Age of Worms, and
Yeah.
we're willing to follow the railway within like, a certain parameter. right?
Yeah.
Like exactly like what you're saying. Like so you still have the leeway to do a lot of stuff within that adventure typically, but obviously, there's certain things where you're like, oh, well, let's go and do this, and you know that it's going to be disruptive, exactly like what you're saying. So I feel like that's how I've always viewed it. I don't know if
Yeah.
you agree with that.
I do. I agree with that totally. And I mean, that's where wilderness encounter tables and so for Age of Worms, I've got, all the Greyhawk references, City of Greyhawk box set, the second edition Greyhawk stuff, the Expedition to Greyhawk Ruins of Greyhawk, third edition stuff. So it allows them to step outside the immediate story and pursue other things because I do have that information. I didn't have to come up with all the personalities of Greyhawk. Somebody's already done that. And so I feel like my players do not feel super constrained, other than they know they're on the clock, something's going on, they're trying to stop the end of the world, all that sort of thing. And we've gone well beyond the written confines of the adventure path. But it's because I had prepared to be able to go well beyond. And I also add other things in. For instance, in that, I'm running it in Pathfinder rather than in 3.5, and I'm running it off of experience points. Like they're doing an actual progression. I've got them on, I started them on the medium track and realized it's just not enough. So I put them on the fast XP track. And they're playing with 5 or 6 PCs rather than the traditional 4. So I've had to pad it out and I've thrown things. There are places in any adventure where there's the opportunity for extra. Um, and like Diamond Lake, there's all this stuff going on. But you know what fits really well with Diamond Lake? Foxglove Manor from Rise of the Rune Lords with the Skin Saw Man. And so they got to go through the Skin Saw murders there on the shores of Diamond Lake. I didn't tell them this is actually from the Rise of the Rune Lords Adventure Path in Golarion. I just stuck it in Diamond Lake and it fit in perfectly. The murders are taking place in Diamond Lake. They got to go out to the haunted mansion. And that led them, if you remember in that, the skin saw man at Foxglove Manor out in the country leads to a townhouse in Magnamar. Oh, there's a townhouse in the free city of Greyhawk. So I put that in. So when they go to Greyhawk for the next adventure, they're not going for the Age of Worms reason. That's why they end up there. They're going because they're following this lead from the townhouse or from Foxglove Manor to see this townhouse. And it just so happens they stumble into the next adventure, which is Hall of Harsh Reflections, where, a party member gets replaced by a doppelganger. Okay, that's super railroady. But for that one, it's a true doppelganger, which is, they can emulate stuff. I just didn't tell the PC that got replaced that he had been replaced. So he just ran his character for the entire adventure until near the end when he discovers his character locked up in a cell, all the snot beaten out of him. And they realize, oh, this guy's been a doppelganger with us the whole time. And I let him do the things he would naturally do and just didn't tell him the things that he was doing on the sly, but it fit with what he was naturally doing. And so, yeah, that's the choo choo. That's a total railroad track, but they loved it. And there was an awesome reveal. And nobody went like, you're taking away my player agency. And I gave him XP for what he did in the adventure because I was like, you got a lot of experience getting the snot beat out of you in the dungeon while you were being tortured. And I used the critical hit deck and the critical fumble deck because I'm mean like that. And in the course of the adventure, he had rolled a 1 and accidentally cut off his own ear. Well, it turned out it was the doppelganger. So all of a sudden, he's got his character back with both ears intact, and he didn't complain about that because he was the bard. He was the one-eared bard, the Van Gogh bard there.
When it comes to Age of Worms, because I feel like some of those early adventure paths it was a learning process.
Oh, absolutely. Especially from the Shackled City to Age of Worms was a huge leap.
Or how many changes or what kind of changes or any changes at all did you have to make in order to make the adventure path a little more smoother? And how did you make it to involve your characters more? Or do you do that?
So the only changes I made was updating stat blocks to Pathfinder. The only changes to the adventure path itself. Now, then I pad things out. Like I think we learned a lot from the adventure paths with once Pathfinder got started in how they would do the player's guides. And all of a sudden you've got traits and things, and you've got ideas to propel you into this particular railroad that you've signed your social contract for. And so I didn't go quite as in depth with that, but they knew they were going through Age of Worms, because that's one thing I do with this group is I'll throw out 3 or 4 different options and let them pick the one they want. And I'll tell you, here's the one I want to do, but you guys can choose. So like I said, we can do Age of Worms, we can do Carrion Crown. I wouldn't mind doing Dragonlance because none of these guys were old enough school gamers to have done Dragonlance back in the 80s. Um, and they chose Age of Worms. So I gave them like player guidance, and like you're in Greyhawk, you can be from anywhere, but you're in Diamond Lake. You're in this crappy little mining town, and you're more or less stuck here looking for a way out, by the economy of the situation. You're poor, you're working this terrible job for terrible people, and you're just looking for an escape. It's like, so how do you get there? And then that allowed them to organically, because none of them, well, one of them actually is, but none of the others are actually from Diamond Lake. The one that is, though, he's a tiefling, but he's got the human trait, so he's not even sure he's a tiefling, and nobody else knows he's a tiefling. And so he grew up on the mean streets of Diamond Lake. Everybody else is from somewhere else. And so that gets that buy-in and that pads it out, and that gives me things to play with. Like one of the guys is a dwarf. Well, he's from Graysmere, and the dwarves have a mining faction in Diamond Lake. So he was a dwarven priest. So I'm like, you have been sent up here as the sort of the religious authority for this local outpost of the dwarves who are working in the mines. And it turns out one of the dwarven mine owner in Diamond Lake is in with the cultists because it's underneath his mine where the Temple of the Eben Triad is located. So I'm like, ooh, I get to work on that. Well, that priest got killed in the mine underneath the Dowerstone mine. And so that guy wanted another dwarf. So I'm like, okay, you're a dwarf. You've been sent to check on the priest. Why have the reports stopped coming back? And so all of a sudden you're building in all of this buy-in, these things that you can use. The Bard is from Greyhawk. He was a graduate of Grey College, and he came to and he used the archaeologist archetype. And so he came to Diamond Lake because of the Cairn Hills. He wants to investigate the cairns, and sort of as a grad assistant to Aviston, the wizard in Diamond Lake. And so that's his in. He's coming here to do this, and he's just basically fresh out of college guy that thinks he's real smart and all that. And so that gets me all the Greyhawk connections. And so when the foxglove or the skin saw murders start, and he starts leaving the messages in blood, it's to that guy. And he's just like, who is this? And he's trying to think through all the possible things from his background in Greyhawk. And so that it went to that. And so I just pad it out. I don't change the original because I mean I would if I needed to. Age of Worms is a phenomenal adventure path. It's a little raw, but it's not super. Again, Shackled City is very raw. Age of Worms, they've started to polish it. And I just add things in mainly to get them XP. So they go to Foxglove Manor, get some XP so they can level up. I have added in, they just finished the one in the Champions Belt where they enter the gladiatorial tournament, and the director of the tournament's trying to summon Caius back by sacrificing everybody in the arena. So they stopped that plot, and I worked in. So just as the end of that, instead of going into the next adventure, I needed more XP. So I added an old, very early third edition adventure from Dungeon Magazine called The Dying of the Light, which is a raid on a vampire castle. And so they were the champions of the Champions Belt tournament. And so they've attracted attention. And a guy approaches them. He's like, I need help. I need champions. And so they're doing this side adventure that they don't know isn't part of the Age of Worms. And so I've just got things like that. That's how I change it. I've just padded out. I get them to do their character buy-in and then use that to sort of build the world around it. And then it doesn't feel like a railroad, and it feels like a sandbox. And that's what they're going there. The immersive role-playing character experience.
So when it comes to padding out these things with extra adventures and stuff like that, is that because aside from the fact that it's cool, but you're saying you're using experience points for these guys to level up. So is it because you need to add more experience
Yeah.
because they're a bigger group now? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and because the experience tables don't line up perfectly between 3.5, which it
Okay.
was written in, and PF1. So yeah, for Age of Worms, yeah, I'm adding it specifically to get them the experience they need to level up at the appropriate times. I could have just done and I do this sometimes in my campaigns, just level them up when they need to level up. But
Yep.
this is a group that I've been playing with. This is a campaign. I mean, it's not the same campaign, but it's the same group doing a series of campaigns since '94. And we've always used experience points. So I wanted
Mm.
to, and this is their first introduction to Pathfinder. We were playing 3.5 for the last
Oh,
20 years.
wow.
We
Okay.
didn't switch to 3.5 from 2E until probably 2005, 2006.
Okay.
Uh, and so, yeah, this is the first time we're actually playing PF1 and it's going well. So,
And what kind of supplemental material do you allow in your Pathfinder games? Like, do you normally have a set thing, or is it just the sky's the limit, or
usually, ironically, I say it's got to be something published by Paizo because third-party publisher mechanical stuff tends to get super swingy and hasn't been play tested. And I say that knowing the irony of having been a third-party publisher
Mhm.
for so much. Uh, my next campaign that I'm going to do is going to be a Greyhawk campaign, and it'll be here in a couple years. And I think I'm going to limit to Pathfinder core.
Okay.
And then because there's just even in Paizo's pretty careful shepherding of power creep, there's still power creep.
Hmm.
Still, there's so many options I get thrown off. I'm like, oh, I didn't account for you being able to do this cheating thing that was this encounter. So I think in that campaign, what I'm gonna do is going to be Pathfinder core only, and then new things out of the million other books they can pick them up after they have encountered something like that. So like if they meet a swashbuckler, well, now they can start taking levels in swashbuckling. Because the idea behind that is your character doesn't own all these books. You know, he doesn't know all the possibilities. He's limited by his life experience to what his life experience is. And I'm saying that the core rule book represents that to a certain extent. He doesn't know all the magic items in the core rule book, and he doesn't
Hmm.
know all the spells in the core rule book, but he can choose from any of the classes in the core rule book, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I found as I've gone farther, I've limited it down more and more and more, which is probably why Pathfinder 2 does not appeal to me because it just explodes with these character
Mm.
options that I'm like, I don't want to have to deal with this guy that can do that every time.
Right. That makes sense.
But
Well,
that look, I admit that's my limitation. That's not because it's bad. It's because I got to deal with it, and so it's got to be something I can deal with.
I think that's sort of where I'm at. I haven't really played Pathfinder or like actual like Wizards of the Coast D&D in a very long time. I've been playing a lot more like Shadow Dark and lighter systems and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And I've been wanting to get my gaming group like into Pathfinder because but everybody seems to be so intimidated by the rules crunch and the heaviness of it.
sure.
And I'm trying to like frame it to them in a way where it's not like, listen, you don't need to be afraid. There's a lot going on here, but we can work through this, right? I feel like when we were playing, because I played Pathfinder 3, or not, I played 3.5 like religiously
Yeah.
for basically until like from the time that it came out, because I started really hard in when third edition came out. I started playing early in the late in the second edition lifespan, and then third edition came out, and I was like, oh my God, this game clicks for me.
Yes, wasn't it amazing? That change. It's like this is it.
And so I mean, you realize that when you get to the high levels, there's a lot of weird things that start to happen. But I think our group sort of centered on this idea of like, okay, you got the core book, and then you've got one splat book that you're allowed. And if you're the spellcaster, I think we always allowed like the spell compendium or something like
Yeah.
that, right? We tried to like keep it down. So I think that's kind of how I would feel if I was running Pathfinder. It'd be like, listen, core rules, and maybe one thing that connects to your class. If you're doing like a summoner or you're doing like somebody that has special rules, but trying to keep it siloed a little bit more. and not to allow so much like rules bloat. And exactly like what you say is what I think what throws game masters off when they're running the game is that it's the surprise factor of like, what, your character can do that?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. How? What is that?
yeah,
How does that
like,
work?
dude, I planned this whole thing with these things in mind, and it's not that I want to screw you, but it's that I had a certain like challenge in mind when and that's not always a bad thing, right? When the players overrun your thing, but at the same time, it I don't know, something about pacing maybe gets thrown off. I'm not sure what exactly it is,
Well,
but
yeah. Well, and it depends. Some of them can be breaking. Like, and this is in the core rules. The travel domain gives this freaking cheating teleport ability. Well, now Tomb of Horrors isn't scary anymore. Right? Now you can, if you've got the travel domain, and I got a group of guys that always has a cleric with the travel domain, you can get out of any trap because you can just basically teleport at least a little ways whenever you want as part of a move action. And it's like, and that's in the core rule book. And so that changes everything. If you're doing Tomb of Horrors, you don't want to have a cleric with a travel domain, or you've got to nerf it in some way, which I think is unfair, where you're like, oh, there's a dimensional lock over the whole place. Then you're not letting them use their powers, which is I don't like that. And, that a little of that goes a long way. Sometimes you limit their powers, but if you're letting them play it, let them play it.
yeah, no, I
I get what
agree.
you're saying.
It's
Yeah,
a fine balancing act, I think, between, like you said, letting them shine and then also providing that challenge for the player's experience. Because it's not, I feel like that's where some of that fun in the game comes from, right? Is it's the adversity, it's overcoming that adversity
absolutely.
and being like, oh my God, I can't believe it. This devious plot here that Greg has come up from with us, and like, how are we gonna get out of this now? Like we're gonna
Yeah.
die.
Well, and yeah, there's so many like speak with dead. Well, that ruined the adventure,
Mm,
You
yeah.
got to be able to account for that, and you got to be creative about that. Uh, I forgot I was going to say something else about what you were saying, but I can't even remember what it was now. But yeah, it's oh, I know what I was going to say. As far as nerfing, that's what Gary did. Look at those high level adventures that he wrote back in the 70s and early 80s. When they were high level, he would take powers away. They just wouldn't be able to access them. And it was just
Mm,
like this arbitrary, you can't do that. Think of Vault of the Drow. There is no teleport in Vault of the Drow because of the radiation there,
right, right.
It's like that's how he and I, he was brilliant. He came up with the game, but I feel like the game has evolved since then because that's no fun. You're high level now. You've got all these powers, but you can't use 50% of them.
You touched on something there, the Vault of the Drow, and so you worked on the Drow of the Underdark supplement.
Yes, I did.
How much of that, like, what part of that did you work on? Because there was a bunch of different authors on that, right?
Ari Marmel, Anthony Pryor, Robert Schwab, and myself. I probably wrote 20 to 25% of it. I definitely wasn't the lead author. This is one that Andy Collins was putting it together and basically had an outline of what they wanted and let us, claim different pieces of it. And so I can't remember everything. This is a long time ago. Let me just do a quick aside. This is something I never thought would have happened when I started writing, but you forget what you've written. Like when I'm writing a book, I think I'll never forget. Oh, I'll remember every line of this. And now I'm looking at this book and it's just the foggiest. Did I write that? Maybe. But the cool thing about it is you can go back and read stuff you've written years later and you're reading it for the first time. And sometimes I'm like, man, I really like this. I don't remember writing it, but I like this. This is good. So
Who is this
I did
Greg
not.
guy? He's awesome.
Yeah, this guy, I need to get more of his stuff. So I, true to myself, did not want to get super crunchy on this. And this is a book that it's getting into Drow, and Drow have always been a very complicated race just because they've got so many abilities and options, and they're sort of the evil version of Mary Sue's. They can do
Mm.
everything. And so I did not want to get into spells, and I did not want to get into feats, and I didn't really want to get into magic items. I actually did two of the prestige classes for it because if you remember back in 3.5, it was all about the prestige class. And so I did the cave walker, cave stalker, sorry. And it's basically just a specialized Underdark hunter, you know, somebody who's like he can wander the tunnels by himself for years. Sort of like a mountain man, but in caves. And I wrote another one called I want to say it was called The Pain Giver, and it got cut because it was a little too a little too much, apparently. So I've probably got the manuscript for it, but you know, Drow specialize in torture and they're also into real weird stuff. And so I didn't feel like I crossed any lines, but they felt like, yeah, I think we want to publish this. So the Pain Giver, or maybe you know what, it might have been called the Pain Taker, actually. One of those. It had a little give, a little take in there. Like I want to say by masochism they could gain powers, like by injuring themselves they could do more, that sort of thing. They thought that was a little much. So I wrote two classes. I did a lot of the cultural stuff, not all of it. I did the I think I did part of the encounter, the sample encounters. I did not do Errol High Sinlu, which I would have loved to have done that, because I find that fascinating. Oh, the Drow Adventures. Yeah, I worked on those too. And then some equipment. I feel like there was a section on tactics. Yeah, Drow tactics. I worked on that too. Trying to like, if you've got all these abilities and you're living in this environment, uh, how do you adapt? You know, we do things that come naturally to us just simply because of where we live and how we live. So what would it be like for them who are in a totally different kind of thing? And so I I don't know that I wrote all of the drow tactics, but I definitely wrote some of them. Because almost all drow have some inherent magical ability. If you can make dancing lights appear, what do you do with that? You know, as a player, I always forgot I had it. That's what I did with it. But if it's second nature to you, it's like before we had iPhones, we wouldn't have thought about having an iPhone, but now we got iPhones and we do everything with it, you know? So what this is their iPhone. We can just do magic. And so that, you know, trying to spitball ideas of how that would work. I came up with a poison system of tracking that they did not keep. And it was probably clunky because I'm not a systems guy. So that makes sense. But yeah, that's what I wrote. So a couple classes, some equipment, some tactics, and then just sort of general drow life type of things.
How did you find the difference between writing adventures and then writing actual, I don't want to say like content because it's all content, but you know what I mean?
Crunch,
Yeah.
crunch. Oh, I got it. I'm sorry. One other thing I wrote. I wrote some of the monsters, and I did the giant lizards, or did at least one of them, and I did the giant footpad lizard, which, if you're an old school gamer, the giant lizard is from module X B10, Night's Dark Terror, and it's a mountain lizard that can climb up and down walls. And so I brought it into from expert and basic expert rules into third edition, which I thought was kind of cool because that's one of my favorite adventures. Anyway, okay. I find Crunch is much more challenging because I'm not thinking about things from a gameplay standpoint, particularly, especially not from a balanced gameplay standpoint. I'm always thinking from a what's the story standpoint. What is interesting about this as a player, not in what fiddly bit do they have and can use, but how does a person react to this? And how does a person pretending to be another type of person, which is the game, react to that? So I'm an adventure writer, not a game designer. I do a little bit of game design. And if I'm writing an adventure and I need some new kind of crunch that hasn't been, you know, a new spell or whatever, I can write that because it's fitting something I need. But like if somebody's like, write me 5 new feats, I'd be like, and it would be very difficult for me. So that's definitely not my strength.
How did you find the difference between working when you worked with Paizo versus Wizards of the Coast? Was there a big difference, or was it like, oh, this is pretty much the same gig, just different people?
Um, well, I was never I never had the personal relationships with the people at Wizards back in the day like I did with the people at Paizo. So again, that was like doing stuff with your friends, which just made it super special. Back then with Wizards, a lot of their third-party stuff was done through a lady named Gwyneth Kestrel,
Okay.
and she was always really easy to work with. Um, the last thing I wrote for Wizards was one of their 5e books, Theros. It's like the ancient
Yep.
Greek
Mythic.
adventures, and I wrote the adventure in that one. And Wes Schneider, who had worked at Paizo and is now at Wizards, and I don't know, maybe since those guys retired, maybe he's running the show. I don't know. I hope so. I love Wes Schneider. But that was very different because I had worked with Wes Schneider on several Paizo things, and it was always a pleasure, a joy to do. And I got in on that book dealing with Wes, and then we had a meeting, and it was like a group meeting, like a panel meeting. I'm in a meeting with 12 people about me writing this 6,000 word adventure, and it included interns who had to put in their 2 cents, and it was awful.
Really?
Because I don't mean to disparage Wizards, but it went from, hey, here's some friends doing this fun hobby to welcome to the corporate panel on how we're going to do this. And I get it. They're a big business and they became multi-billion dollar business, and they're part of Hasbro and all that. But I hated that
Mm,
because I want them to say what they want, give me the parameters, wind me up, and let me go.
right.
What I don't want is notes. I'm not doing this so that you can send it back to me. If you want to change something in what I wrote, change it. It's yours. You bought it from me. I
Hmm.
wrote what I did my best to write what you wanted, and if you want to tweak it, tweak it. Don't send me notes because I've
Okay.
already written what I want to meet
Right.
the parameters you gave me. If you're changing the parameters, that's a new contract as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Right.
So these guys just in this meeting, and I hadn't even written it yet. They're basically, so what do you envision? And so I gave them my pitch of what I envisioned, and then they immediately started telling me how it was wrong and what it should be. And I'm like, why did you ask me? Why didn't you just start with this is what we want? And the thing that killed me, there was an intern, and I know they're getting not paid or they're getting paid pennies, and they're trying to get a foot in the door, and I have nothing against interns. But this intern really felt like they needed to give me some solid input.
Mm,
And so I do this adventure pitch, which is an adventure. There's railroad tracks there. And it's as part of this ginormous book about the setting.
hmm.
And this intern's like, well, I think you need to include something in there about what if they don't want to follow this course of the adventure and want to explore other areas of Theros. And I'm like, that's the rest of the book. If they don't want to do the adventure, do something else from the book. This is the adventure I'm writing.
Right.
And I don't know if it was Jonathan Tweet or somebody. It was one that maybe it's some name at Wizards. I forgot who. But after I said that, they're like, we can make that a sidebar. Let's move on.
That's interesting.
And and I did not write that sidebar. And I don't believe that sidebar got put in because I was like, that's the dumbest thing. No offense to that intern. I could give a name if you wanted me to, because I can't remember the name. But I
Hmm.
was like, that's not even a real note. That's you feeling like you have to say something in a board meeting,
Right.
which is what I hated, is I was in a board meeting
So,
about this adventure I was going to write. And so that wasn't fun. Wes has reached out to me since then, and we just haven't been able to connect. I would work with Wes Schneider again in a heartbeat. I love him. I don't know anybody else at Wizards really.
okay.
I haven't worked with anybody there that I know. I actually do know some other people that I've worked with previously, but it's just I loved working with Paizo because I was working with my friends, not for some corporation. Look, I work for a corporation every day. I work for the man every day, and I hate that. I don't need to do that in my gaming hobby stuff.
Hmm.
I don't need more of the man.
That's interesting because so that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about was that, you did work on the Mythic Odyssey of Theros
Yeah, that's what it's
2020.
called, Mythic Odyssey of Theros.
So
And they
like
totally changed my adventure, by the way.
really,
My adventure was a very Odyssey style adventure, and they took out like the last third and turned it into a dungeon crawl. And I'm like, okay, you can do that.
so are you a Magic fan? Like, do you play Magic the
No,
Gathering? Where, like,
I
I
have.
okay,
I played with my niece when she was, no, that was Pokemon. I don't think I've ever played Magic the Gathering. I get those two
interesting.
mixed up because it's sort of the same mechanical type of thing, I think. But
So
no,
what was it like in terms of like the research then that you had to do for that particular adventure? Because it seems to me you would want to have somebody who's like connected to the
sure.
property on some level.
They had prepared a very extensive Bible that I referenced. It was probably 50, 60 pages long. And it talked about, the polities, and it talked about the gods and the culture. And plus it's just sort of ancient Greece in general. So I
Hmm.
had a ton of resource to draw from, and it was a huge help. So that's how. Because yeah,
Okay.
I at the time I didn't know that it was part of Magic.
Okay, interesting.
Later on, they're like, "Oh, that's from Magic the Gathering." I'm like, "Oh, okay,
Okay.
they do that."
Yeah, no, I was surprised when I was like researching through because you have like so many credits, and so there were things where I was like, "Oh, I did not realize that he had worked on that project." I mean, there was many things that I was like, "Yeah, of course, this is definitely something that I was familiar with." Um, so earlier you had mentioned Slumbering Tsar. Obviously, we'd be like super remiss if we did not talk about your Magnus Opus, the
Yeah,
Slumbering Tsar, this giant megatome. Can you
as
talk
far as
about?
I know, still the biggest physical adventure ever printed.
Okay.
I don't know that anything with more page. Now, you look at Tallest, the tallest book, at least the original one, I think he re-released it,
Hmm.
didn't it had fewer pages. But then there was like 1,000 pages of supplemental material
Hmm.
that you could get on PDF. Well, okay, that not including supplemental stuff on PDF. At the time that was published, it was the largest published adventure ever, and I'm not sure that by page count and probably by
Right.
word count, I'm not sure that has been surpassed, other than Richard Pett's The Blight, which I developed for Frog God, which has more words, but we uh, we laid it out much tighter, so it's just a little shorter in page count.
Oh, that's
So
hilarious.
the
The
rivalry with
rivalry.
Richard Pett continues. It's just like 2 pages shorter.
That's awesome. What a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't know. Why is the font size so small? We couldn't afford a larger font. Sorry, that was on special.
Yeah, that's great. So, could you talk a little bit about like how it came about? What was the experience writing it like, and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Slumbering Czar uh, is basically the beginnings of what became the Lost Lands for Frog God Games. At the time, it was still Necromancer Games, and Necromancer Games had published that trilogy of adventures, Rapana Thuk, The
Hmm.
Dungeon of Graves. And I say the original publication was 3 adventures, but they've since combined it several times into a much bigger book. But at the very beginning, there's just this little blurb of background that describes how the how it came to be. I'm just gonna read it so people know what this was in the book at the very beginning. It said, many hundreds of years ago, the forces of good allied to destroy the main temple of Orcus in the ancient city of Zar. With their temple in ruins, the surviving priests of this accursed demon god city, I'm sorry, this accursed demon god fled the city with an army of enemies on their tail. And that's what leads to Rapana Thuk, which became the Dungeon of Graves. That was the site of a big battle they had. But I'm like, wait a second. What's this ancient city of Zar that just gets name dropped and is the whole impetus behind this massive Dungeon of Graves thing, and then is never really mentioned again?
Hmm.
And I was like, there's a huge story here. And I was working for Paizo at the time, but Necromancer would accept submissions. I was like, I want to write an adventure for Necromancer Games, and I want to write this backstory. I want to create the backstory of Rapana Thuk. And so I pitched it to him, and Bill called me. He's like, yeah, we want it. And I was like, I think it's going to be like 100,000 words. He's like, we'll do it. Yeah, do it. And so I started writing it. And as it was going, I realized, oh, it's going to be a lot more than 100,000 words. And so I'm like, okay, I think this is going to actually be 3 books instead of 1 book because I need one for, the wastelands around it, the desolation. I need one for the actual city ruins, and then I need one for this citadel in the city. And he's like, okay, we'll do it. Well, this is around the time that 4E was dropping, and Wizards is pulling. It did the GSL and was trying to nullify the OGL, which probably didn't legally happen, but it basically caused Necromancer Games to shut down. Well, by that time, I had written this 3 book magnum opus, and it was more like 500,000 words between the 3 books. And Necromancer Games ceased to exist. And they hadn't paid me, they hadn't purchased it from me. And I was like, what do I do with this thing that I've spent like the last 2.5 years writing? And so I started shopping it around. And I talked to Paizo. I was like, hey, I can, shave the serial numbers off all this, take it out of the Necromancers and put it into Golarion. And they were very open to the idea. And they're like, well, how many words is it? I was like, it's about 500,000 words. Well, a Paizo adventure path is about 180,000 words
All six
of actual.
books?
Yeah, yeah. But just
Wow.
the adventure section. Now, it's
Okay.
probably closer to 300,000 for the entire books. But the adventures usually ran around 35,000 words.
Okay. Wow.
So I'm basically pitching them 2.5 adventure paths. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, we can't do that. They're like, well, can you cut it down? And I'm like, not really. That sort of seems to do it injustice. Um, and so then I started pitching it to other people. Like I talked to Wolfgang Bauer at that time. I think it was still Kobold, or it was still Open Design, had
Hmm.
not yet become Kobold Press, and he was very interested. And then he is like, "Oh yeah, we can't do that." So eventually, Bill got back to me, and he's like, "Hey, I want to start a new company. You still got that book?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's and 4E had come out and basically flopped. 5E was not out yet. So by this time, Paizo controlled the gaming market more or less, and
Mm.
Pathfinder was the game that had replaced D&D. There was just that little segment of time when
Hmm.
Paizo ruled the world. It was
Yep.
awesome. And he's like, "Can you update it to Pathfinder?" I was like, "Yeah, I can do that. It's not a bad update from 3.5 to Pathfinder." He's like, "I want to start a company just to publish this book. And because you've got to update it, and it's going to take a while. It took me like a year and a half to update it all to Pathfinder. He's like, I want to release it on PDF in serial format, 14, 14 little books, and then we'll combine it all at the end, and people can buy a subscription to this, and they get it, one a month for 14 months, and then at the end we give them the big giant book all put together.
Hmm.
And so we did that. And we didn't kickstart it. Kickstarter might have been around at that time, but I had never heard of Kickstarter, neither had Bill. So I'm not even sure it existed. And so we sold subscriptions. I want to say it was for like $100 or something. So they would get a PDF every month. And then we would also sell a physical copy of each individual, each one would be 50 pages long or whatever. And then at the end, if you bought the subscription, you could get the beast with a bonus adventure at the end, which you couldn't get if you didn't buy the subscription. That was the plan anyway. So we did it, and we sold a ton of them. And like the very first chapter, which is just the little town known as the camp, that's part one, the edge of oblivion. It's that little settlement right on the edge of the desolation. We printed up like promo copies of that and took them to Gen Con. And every time I went to Gen Con, I would work at the Paizo booth just as a volunteer. But Paizo would sell Frog God stuff, and they sell this. So I was able to like give out these promo copies of the first adventure at Gen Con, and it did so well that he's like, "Hey, I've got some other manuscripts from Necromancer that have never been published. Let's publish them as Frog God imprints." And we did that. And then it just grew and grew until Frog God eventually, Necromancer was defunct. Clark Peterson was basically out of the business at that point. So Frog God bought out Necromancer. Now, Clark Peterson went on to found Legendary Games with Jason Nelson. But so all of a sudden, we've got all of Necromancer's catalog as well, and which was about 70 books. And Bill's like, you've got to write a a campaign setting for all this. So I had to take all of Necromancer's catalog and condense it into a game world, and that's what became the Lost Lands. And I was not with Frog God when the final Lost Lands book came out.
Right.
So, but they did go off of my outline for a lot of it. And you can, if you ever want to see my outline, which is compiling all the bits out of different, like all of my Necromancer games adventures are all marked up and highlighted as I'm pulling world information out. And so you can get the developer's notes for the world of the Lost Lands, and it's like 40 pages, 45 pages, and it's literally just taking my Word documents and printing them into this is the Lost Lands game world.
One of the things that I was always curious about was so the city of Czar, from what I understand, was like part of Bill's world. So
Yeah, it was a name in Bill's world. Yeah.
okay, so did he have like was there like pushback where he was like, "Brah, that's not how it happened, man. Like this is the real thing." Or was it more of like a thing of like, "Oh, dude, I never thought about that. This is freaking fantastic."
I think it was more the latter. I don't think so. There were three principal cities in Bill's, and like most of these campaign settings, they stem from somebody's home campaign.
Right.
I think there were three principal cities in Bill's home campaign, and they were Czar, Zen, Tsen, and I
Hmm.
think Bard's Gate. That might have been Clark's, but I think that was Bill's.
Okay.
And Zen had a specific background, and Zen got written up in Bill's Sword of Air,
Hmm.
where you get a deep dive into Zen. But Czar had never, he didn't give me any information on it. He just,
Interesting.
the background from Rapanathuk was the information I had on Czar. And, it talked about the Army of Light and all that stuff. So I basically got to build it from whole cloth, but while referencing Bard's Gate, which was
Right.
out, and referencing the Rapanathuk books. And there's just little, they would name drop stuff in different Necromancer games adventures. Never much, but I compiled all of that so that I
Okay.
could build. The only differences between Czar and Bill's idea is that when he wrote Sword of Air years later, he did not reference because I mentioned Sword of Air because I thought that was the next book we were doing. So I wrote a
Mm,
prologue to go into Sword of Air, and he completely ignored that for Sword of Air. So I was like, dang it. Well, I mean, it's little things, but that's the
right.
only things that don't really match up.
Okay.
But yeah,
So
he let me run with it, and he liked it.
that's awesome. When because you ran this for your group. Now I'm not sure was that part of the play test or was that just something where you were like going along running the campaign at the same time you were writing it?
Yes, all the above.
Okay. So basically you started off with Tomb of Abyss which was an old school like
Yes,
necromancer module,
the
one of the
the the
first ones.
Stoneheart Mountain Dungeon, I
Right.
think. No, Tomb of the Abyss is the name of the adventure. The Stoneheart Mountain Dungeon is what the actual dungeon is. Yeah,
Right.
sorry, you're correct.
Um and then your players eventually move into this I guess it's around seventh level.
Yeah.
Well, at least that's I believe that's what the adventure the book says. So how much of the book was something that your players actually experienced, and how much of it was things that you added in as you were like filling out the rest of the book?
So I had the 3.5 version pretty much written by the time I was running it, or at least I was writing ahead. So I would say my home group probably went through 99% of the written encounters that are in like they were completionist types, so they would go to every room, that sort of thing. I can't really think of anything specific that's in the published adventure that they did not encounter, that they did not get to experience. So it was our campaign, but they knew it was kind of play testy also.
Okay, so how much of their experience playing through the playtest like changed things that you had already sort of previously established, where you were like, okay, I'm gonna set out this area, and then all of a sudden it was like the players took a left turn where you thought they were gonna take a right
Yeah.
turn.
They did not, there's not much. I mean,
No.
it was more of like, oh, they might deal with this challenge in this way, so I need to tweak it a little bit so that it remains a challenge if somebody thinks like that. They didn't really do any left turns on me. That's I I think I'm a pretty good adventure writer, and one thing that I think is one of my talents in that is I can kind of anticipate what people might do. Now, not necessarily on a tactical level. I don't think about every possible spell they might cast or whatever,
Hmm.
but like how would what are the logical ways to go from here? And I think I do a pretty good job of that. In my experience, I haven't had any adventures rewritten or I haven't been told that an adventure got broken because a party just did something totally different. Now, any party could if they, like I said, they decide, well, we want to explore the moon, okay. That's a different adventure. I don't
Right.
really have that accounted for here, but nothing really. I haven't had that issue with the stuff I've written that I'm aware of. I mean, people's home campaigns and stuff, their experience might be different, but they haven't told me if that was the
Okay.
case.
And you've already kind of stated that like Pathfinder 1 is your happy place.
Yes.
Do you anticipate that one day we might see a new update of Slumbering Tsar? And do you think to either like Pathfinder 2 or 5e? And do you feel like there's anything that you would change or add to the campaign?
So there was for a long time a 5e conversion being done for Slumbering Czar that they were going to release as a PDF, I think. And I don't know that it ever happened. It's just so daunting. It's the thing is 550,000 words,
Hmm.
and it's a lot of stat blocks. It's so many stat blocks. And so I knew people were working on it, and I think, they would just run out of steam, which I don't blame them.
Hmm.
So I have no idea. I
Okay.
don't think it converts to Pathfinder 2 near as well. At the very end of Necromancer, Bill and Clark were asking me if I thought I could update it to 4E because the 4E rules were out and they were considering signing on the GSL. But I was like, that it's such a different game. It changes everything.
Hmm.
And I feel like Pathfinder 2 is not as game changing as 4E was, but I think it's enough game changing. I don't know how I would convert it. I mean, somebody else, and maybe somebody has. I don't know. It's possible. I don't know what
Okay.
else is out there, but it definitely changes the dynamic of things drastically. A 5E conversion I could see working pretty well.
Okay.
But I don't have any plans to do any of that because I don't know PF2 well enough
Fair
to
enough.
do it.
So one of my complaints, and I know I have a listener, at least one listener who feels this about because they're running through Wrath of the Righteous right now,
Yeah.
uh, and they're like, we're all kind of like, why are the stat blocks in the middle of the adventure? Why are they not all compiled in an appendix at the end where it's convenient to basically have them all set out separately, and then you could just use that instead of having to flip back and forth
Yeah.
between the book. What was the, I mean, maybe that's a not your department, but I'm just curious about how you feel about that and what if you knew the answer to that question.
Uh, I have seen and done it both ways. So when I read an adventure, I want to read it like a book.
Hmm.
And so Stat Blocks Incorporated actually makes it better for me to process it. If you remember back in late 3.5, Wizards switched their format where they would write the adventure and then the actual encounters would be 1 or 2 page spreads at the end of the book, and it would have all the stat blocks and it would have a close up of the map and all that. And they're like, this is the way to do it, especially for running at cons. I could not read that book
Hmm.
because it's one thing to be flipping stat to look for stat blocks in the middle of an adventure. It's another thing to constantly be flipping while you're trying to read and process the adventure. It's like trying to read the end notes while you're reading a book. It
Right.
messes up the flow. When I read game books, I read them as a book, and that's how it engages me. So I actually prefer it in now. In general, I like to include the full stat block as often as possible. That's not always practical. So sometimes there's
Right.
a reference to a page back, but I would prefer to have them right there. Not everybody likes that. I feel like the 3.5 experiment with that was kind of a flop. They did it in 4E and then they
Hmm.
stopped doing it. But in 5E they do, but all their stat blocks are so generic in 5E. It's
Right.
like
Right.
there are 5 soldiers and you go to the DM guide and you've got soldier. I'm like, wow, that I don't think that's an improvement. Um, so we did it both ways. My personal preference is including it in the adventure as you go. Of course, then you've got to start abbreviating it and making references to previous pages just to save on page count because paper is expensive and
Hmm.
paper is heavy, and you're just adding cost to the book when you don't do that. And so it's really a personal preference thing. I prefer that, but it is a pain. So if I know, like, especially if it's going to be something complicated, I'll make a photocopy of the stat block and just have a stack of them to the side, which is
Hmm.
essentially what you've just described,
Right.
right? Having
Right.
an appendix at the end, except I can also read it and read that encounter and read the stat block and get it while I'm going, which is beneficial to me. I think it's a personal preference thing. I can't, your listener makes a valid point, and that seems to be that listener's preference. And I mean, yeah, that's valid. If that works better for them, that's what if that worked better for me, that's what I would want too. It
Right.
never did. So, and I did get to choose. So that's how I chose it. And my apologies for to people that it didn't work as well for.
No, that's fair. I think
But they get the PDF.
this is true.
Or on God would always give the PDF for free if you bought the book. So you
Right.
literally could have it referenced on the side.
I think in his particular case, he has seeing problems. So for
Oh,
reading the text, it's difficult, and I think he uses a program that like takes text to voice. I believe. I'm not 100% sure how he does it, but and I think also there's problems with the like sidebars also with that
I'm
when it comes to
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from a accessibility standpoint, I think that's part of where it comes from. But I agree what you're saying in terms of like having the flow of information being accessible. To me, it was more of a sense of like, okay, so now from a practical standpoint, like when I'm ready to actually run the encounter, having the stat block separated from the map or the text. So I've always sort of created like my own little encounter running thing. I don't think that the way that they did it when they went into the 4E and the late 3.5 era there where they were experimenting was the right way to do it. I think if you had a small little thing like a mini adventure or something, then that's great. You got a big massive encounter you're running, all the information's there. It's like a, you know, it's easy to access and see, but from like you said from a reading perspective, it's nice to have all the material presented in a organized fashion, right?
And I can tell you, accessibility did not even cross my mind. What you just described with that guy, yeah, man, I don't know. I don't know how to accommodate that because that would be sidebars, all of that stuff would be such a pain to have to deal with.
Yeah.
But that certainly was not what I was thinking of
Yeah.
at the time.
Oh,
And I'll also say this, most encounters are simple encounters. You know, what, 85, 90% of encounters are simple encounters. And so you can have room description, tactics, stat block, next room, and it does all fit nice and neat. It's that 10 to 15% where there's complex encounters where it becomes a problem.
right. I also imagine with when you get to high level and then you
High
get these
level,
very large stat blocks where
for
there's a
sure.
lot going on. Talking about high level encounters then,
Yeah.
how did you or how do you manage dealing with these super complicated stat blocks? Because I remember, I think it's like at the end of Age of Worms where you're looking at Caius' stat block, and I think that thing takes up like 2 pages of the
Yeah.
magazine.
Yeah,
So
maybe three.
how do you grapple with that?
Well, first of all, the caveat in Age of Worms, I haven't gotten that far yet, so I don't know. If you look at high level encounters that I've written, I haven't run a ton of high level encounters. I've written several. I tend to try to keep them as simple as possible. I would say I have never written a Caius level stat block. I don't mean Caius level of power. I mean Caius level of complexity
Okay.
stat block. Even in Prince of Demons, which stats out Demogorgon, uh, hashtag Stranger Things, right? Sorry. I'd say his stat block is not as complicated as Caius's is in Age of Worms. And so I handled it by avoidance as much as possible. Now, when I get there, it's tough. It's a pain and it takes extra work. It takes extra work to write it, obviously. It takes extra work to run it because yeah, I'll forget things that they can do. I'm not this natural GM who just has this flow and knows what everything is, but people like that I'm in awe of, the ones that just have
Right.
it all right here. I'm constantly referencing and reading. I've gotten pretty good over the years of keeping the flow going in the game, but there are pauses where somebody's talking to me and I'm scrambling through the stat block. And let me tell you how many times I've forgotten that they have the feat power attack. I mean, I'm like, oh, this or vital strike. I'm like, this guy should have been doing this all along. This very
Mm,
simple thing, but because the stat block's so big. And so that's the trade-off. 5e doesn't really have that problem. PF2 doesn't really have that problem because the stat blocks, I think, are much more simplified. And so I see the appeal of it. I would rather have the option and just screw it up than not have the option, I think.
mm,
At least that's where
interesting.
I'm at. But that doesn't mean I'm right on that. That's just a me thing.
No, I've definitely, so my experience from running fifth edition versus running Pathfinder 3.5 was I felt like you're missing something in that simplicity. I don't
Yeah,
know,
I agree.
I don't know exactly how to define it, but there's something to me that feels like, ugh, like I would like to have a little bit more, like turn up the volume on this creature somehow. And I haven't found a good way because I really struggled running a lot of these, third edition encounters because and Pathfinder because it was like the complexity level of some of these things, and I always felt like I was being ganged up on by my players
Oh,
because
absolutely.
you got 4 or 5 minds of like tactically minded people who have crafted their characters to be,
Yeah.
engines of destruction, and now it's like, oh my God, how am I going to stop them? Like obviously you want your bad guys to lose, but you want them to lose in a cool way, like
Yeah, it needs to be a
they
challenge. They need to be
yeah.
threatened. Absolutely. I'll tell you, I part of my secret is I rarely play a high level thing with people that I haven't played with a lot, because I start at first level and work my way up. And I absolutely use my knowledge of the players against them, like their psychology and their tendencies. And I'm not saying that the bad guy knows that, but I'm saying the bad guy is going to do the most advantageous thing. So I don't think I cheat like that, but I definitely, when I'm running the encounter, I know this guy's probably going to do something like that. And so I account for that. And I'm always harping on my players about the difference between player knowledge and character knowledge. And it's much blurrier for the GM, I would say. I would say the character knowledge might be player knowledge from my standpoint uh, sometimes. Or, maybe they just happen to be lucky and know to do that. Now, I don't totally nerf them and I don't totally cheat them, but I do that to make it more difficult for them. So if any of my players are watching, too bad. If you haven't figured that out in the last 30 years, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's nice. I tend to agree with you though. So obviously things have changed for you since you first got into the industry, or have changed. The industry itself has changed a lot.
Yes. Oh man.
Um,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
what kind of advice would you offer those who are looking to break into the RPG industry on a professional level?
This is the hardest question you could have asked me because I don't know if I have any advice because I think it's so different, not just the industry, but the audience. I mean, the audience is exponentially larger. When I started publishing, most people that played these games were white guys my age, or a little bit younger, or a little bit older. But my demographic, well, it made it pretty easy to cater to that audience. And I don't think that that's true anymore. I mean, I've got my kids' friends finding out that I've published D&D, and they have no idea what I've written, but they think it's so cool, right? And I think this is good. I mean, obviously, it's been good for the game in that it's hugely popular. There's millions and millions and millions of players worldwide, and Hasbro's made billions of dollars off of it or whatever. But in the process, like in all things in life, as stuff evolves over time, I have definitely lost touch with the zeitgeist. And that's sad to me. I miss my game, but I don't think it's bad. I mean, it's just like every person as they get old and the new music comes out and they're like, ah, that new music is crap. Well, it's not crap. It's just not AC/DC or whatever.
Hmm.
And so just recognizing that. But so consequently, I don't know how the industry works anymore. It is so um, caught up in sort of a performative aspect. All of these people are videoing their games, and you've got all these voice actors and comedians who are doing improv games and stuff like that. And that's all so outside like I've been invited to participate in stuff like that, and I don't do it because I'll just be sitting there at the table, the virtual table, going, enjoying the super creativity and hilarity that they're doing and contributing nothing because I can't hang, right? Because I'm not hip or whatever. Uh, so it's just so different. I don't know that I even have a relevant voice. And that, that's fine. I don't know that I need to have a relevant voice, but I don't know what advice I could give other than, just the generic try hard. I okay, when it comes to writing, just write something. There's my advice. Just write something. If your creativity is dead at the moment, which happens all the time, you get blocked, start grinding through stat blocks, things that you don't have to think about. You're just doing the math, just to keep flowing. Put words on paper. Put something every day you can. If you can write every day, even if it's a sentence. That would be the advice on somebody that is wanting to get into the industry and, write an adventure, which is daunting. But as far as like tips on how to do it, I don't know. That's questions that I should be asking other people that do it because I'm out of the loop. I'm out of touch, and that's okay. It's all right to sort of gracefully fade into the background and just be part of the history of it as a as opposed to part of the cutting edge of it.
The focus of this show has always been about how to become a better game master. What would be one piece of advice that you would offer to novices and or veteran GMs?
For novices, I would say keep it simple. Focus on the encounter. Focus on three encounters. Focus on these few rooms. The barrier to entry is so high because there's so much. You feel like you got to have it all in there. Well, no, you don't. You get to guide the game. So if you don't want them to go through that door yet, that door's locked. It's arcane locked. They can't open it because you're not prepared. And that door can be mysteriously open later when you're ready for it. Just focus on the bite-sized bits. It's the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So just take the bites. Don't feel like you got to shove that whole elephant down. And that way, you're only having to process these doable bits instead of trying to do it all at once. For veteran GMs who probably don't need any advice from me, my focus is make it part of the bigger story. I'll do one shots at cons. I'll run one shot games at cons. But look, to be honest, when I'm running a game at a con, my entire goal is to kill you in a hilarious way. That's it. That's it. And I'm straight up. I'm like, if you survive, good for you. I'll be a little disappointed. You're going to think I'm cheating and I'll be borderline cheating, but my goal is to kill you and for it to be as fun for everybody as possible, but mainly for me. I want to see you die hilariously. But that's not how I run home games, which kind of gave me a bad reputation to where people wouldn't want to be in my campaigns because like you're just going to kill me every time we play. I'm like, no, because in a campaign, I got to keep you around. I mean, I want you to sweat it. I want you to be worried,
Mm.
and I might kill you. But that's not my goal. My
Nice. That's great advice. I disagree with you. I think that even veterans are looking for um how do other game masters, especially ones that are as have been around the block as long as you have and have, had the experiences that you've had, what can we take from others and incorporate into our own toolbox, so I really appreciate that.
well, thank you. I just would not want to presume that I would know anything that they do not know because I don't know everything by any means, not even close.
Well, you're very humble. Um, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like I could talk your ear off forever, and maybe we'll have to like have another conversation down the line about something, related. Is there anything that I didn't ask you or that you'd like to add before I let you go?
I mentioned earlier that back in the day, I hardly ever got to play games because I was writing games. Well, now I'm getting to play all these games I wrote. So I'm running 4 games right now. I run a every Thursday night game, which is Set in the Blight by Frog God
Nice.
Games. It's Richard Pett's creation. He called it Alice in Wonderland meets Frankenstein. And I feel like that's a pretty good. And this is the book that is more words than Slumberings Are, but is somehow like 2 pages shorter. So it's just not quite the longest published adventure ever. And that one's great. I run a every other Saturday morning game, which is the Northland Saga, which is the brainchild of Kenneth Spencer. He wrote like the first 4 adventures, 5 adventures, and then he got a job with Cubicle 7 and did a lot of work for them. So I wrote the rest of it with the help from a guy named Kevin Wright also. And this is just a giant Viking campaign, also set in the Lost Lands. And we are on the 11th of 12 adventures.
Oh my
And
gosh.
we've been playing that about 5 years. And then I've got a every other Sunday campaign, which is, I mentioned it earlier, Aegis of Empires. This is also Lost Lands. It's got the logo, but it's through Legendary Games. And it's been going about 5 years. And this is I called this not an adventure path, but an adventure arc because it's 6 adventures and it is designed for you to insert your own adventures in between.
Oh, that's
And so
cool.
what I did is I use a bunch of old first edition dungeon magazine adventures, like the Moor Tomb map, the Ruins of Nol Dare, and I stick them in there as the in between adventures. And so we're on the second last adventure of that too, and it's been going about 5 years, and it's nearly done. And then I've got a once a month Sunday campaign, which is Age of Worms. Kevin Wright, that guy I told you about, he got the PDFs of all the magazines and bound them for me and gave this to me as a gift. So I have the probably the only hardback of
That
the
is
Age of
amazing.
Adventure Path, and it's awesome too. So those are the games, and then I play in 2 games alternating Friday nights. One is a Pathfinder 1 game, which is Strange Eons Adventure Path,
Okay.
which I did not get to write for because it came out right after I stopped writing for them, and one of my biggest sorrows is I didn't get to write for Strange Eons because it's the Lovecraftian one, right? And then the other, we alternate that. And then the other Friday nights is Kingmaker
Oh my
Pathfinder 2
gosh.
version.
Okay. Wow.
And also we've been doing some play testing of Michael Sayers' Infinite Reimagine game on those alternate Friday nights. So I'm getting to game now. I'm going to Gen Con here in a few weeks and I'll run some killer games where again, I'm just going to try to kill you. And I'll run some off the books. I always take a couple adventures that will be, after hours, find a hotel lobby we play in. So if anybody runs into me at Gen Con, it's a game I run for friends, but there's always a few extra slots. So if somebody comes up and is like, hey, if we can make it work, then I'll let you in the game. We'll play. I'll kill you hilariously, but hopefully it'll be fun.
That's fantastic. This is so cool. This has been such a great experience. I'm fanboying, meeting one of my old-time heroes. So thank you so much again for coming on and having this conversation with us. And I'm gonna have to get my hands on that Legendary Adventures
It's a good one.
HS.
I don't know if it's available still in print, but I'm sure they've still got the PDFs.
I'm gonna figure it out. But
But yeah.
yeah, this has been great, and I, I'm gonna figure out a way to get you on again because I feel
Okay.
like this has been such a cool conversation. And to all of you out there listening, buy Greg's stuff, find it, get it, learn from it, and until we talk again, plungers up.
Yeah, it's been a treat, Jason. Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate it.
thank you very much, Greg.